The morning air on Kepler 442b carried the scent of purple grass and something that reminded Sarah of cinnamon. At 7 years old, she had already seen 3 different worlds, following her parents as they worked to establish the first human agricultural colony outside the solar system. While the adults worried about soil composition and atmospheric processors, Sarah found wonder in everything. The Zephyrian wolves were nothing like Earth wolves. Standing nearly 4 feet tall with silver-blue fur that shimmered like metal, they possessed an intelligence that made even the bravest colonists nervous. Their eyes held depth that suggested complex thoughts, and their pack behavior showed sophisticated social structures. The colonial government had declared them off-limits, after several tense encounters, where the wolves had demonstrated they could disable human technology with some form of bioelectric pulse. Sarah wasn't supposed to be in the restricted zone beyond the settlement's perimeter fence. Her parents thought she was playing in the communal garden with the other children. Instead, she had squeezed through a gap in the fence that the maintenance crew hadn't yet repaired, drawn by the sound of something in distress. She found the wolf near a cluster of crystal formations that jutted from the ground like frozen lightning. The magnificent creature was pawing at its snout, making low whimpering sounds that tugged at Sarah's heart. Its pack was nowhere to be seen, and the wolf seemed smaller than the others she had observed from the safety of the settlement. Most humans would have run. The colonial briefings had emphasized the dangers, the unknowns, the potential for these creatures to view humans as threats. But Sarah saw only an animal in pain, just like when her cat Whiskers had gotten a splinter in his paw back on Earth. She approached slowly, her small hands visible and empty. The wolf's brilliant yellow eyes fixed on her, and for a moment that stretched like eternity they simply looked at each other. Sarah had always been good with animals. Her mother said she had a gift, a natural empathy that transcended species barriers. The wolf didn't retreat as she drew closer. Its breathing was labored and she could see something protruding from its left nostril, a thick black thorn from one of the native shrubs. The thorn was barbed, designed by evolution to stick fast in whatever touched it. The wolf's attempts to remove it had only driven it deeper. Sarah knelt in the purple grass, bringing herself to the wolf's eye level. She spoke softly, the way she did to frightened animals back home. The words didn't matter. It was the tone, the gentleness, the lack of threat in her voice that counted. The wolf's ears, triangular and rimmed with what looked like silver wire, swiveled toward her. Extending one small hand, Sarah let the wolf catch her scent. Its wet nose touched her palm and she felt a slight tingle as if touching a weak electric fence. The wolf's bioelectric field was active but muted, perhaps weakened by pain or perhaps deliberately restrained. With infinite care, Sarah reached toward the thorn. The wolf went completely still, its yellow eyes never leaving hers. She could feel its warm breath on her fingers as she grasped the black spine. It was embedded deep and she knew pulling it straight out would cause more damage. Her father had taught her about removing thorns when they went hiking on Earth. Twist slightly, then pull at an angle opposite to the barbs. Sarah applied the same principle, her small fingers working with surprising dexterity. The thorn came free with a soft pop, followed by a small amount of luminescent blue fluid. The wolf's blood, she realized. The effect was immediate. The wolf's breathing eased and it shook its head vigorously, clearing its nasal passages. When it looked at Sarah again, something had changed in its expression. Where there had been pain and wariness, there was now something that looked remarkably like gratitude. The wolf pressed its snout gently against Sarah's cheek, and this time the electric tingle was stronger, almost warm. For just a moment, Sarah thought she heard something, not a sound, but a feeling, like a voice without words saying thank you in a language deeper than speech. When the wolf bounded away into the crystal forest, moving with fluid grace now that it could breathe freely, Sarah felt she had just experienced something important. She couldn't have known that the wolf, whose name translated roughly to Storm Who Walkso, was the youngest offspring of the pack's alpha pair. She couldn't have known that Zephyrian culture placed enormous value on debts of honor, especially those involving the young. And she certainly couldn't have known that Storm Who Walks possessed the rare gift among his people of long-range telepathic communication, and that news of the small human who had shown kindness to a wolf was already racing across the planet at the speed of thought. Sarah simply walked back through the gap in the fence, Her heart full of wonder at the beautiful creature she had helped. She would keep this secret, she decided. Adults always made things complicated, and this had been perfect in its simplicity. Behind her, hidden among the crystal formations, 3 pairs of yellow eyes watched her go. The pack had been observing the entire encounter, ready to intervene if the strange little alien had threatened their youngest member. Instead, they had witnessed something that would change the course of history between their species. The wolves began to sing, their voices carrying across the settlement on frequencies just below human hearing. To Sarah's people, it sounded like the wind through the crystal formations, but to every Zephyrian on the planet, it carried a message that would echo through generations. The humans were not what they had expected. 3 days passed before the colonial leadership noticed the change. Dr. Marcus Webb, the settlement's xenobiologist, was the first to document the anomaly in his daily reports. The Zephyrian wolves, previously maintaining a cautious distance of at least 2 kilometers from the human settlement, had begun appearing at the perimeter fence. They weren't threatening or aggressive. They simply sat in the purple grass watching, dozens of them, from adolescents to grizzled pack elders, their silver-blue fur catching the alien sunlight. They made no attempts to breach the fence or disable the electronic barriers. They just observed with those unnervingly intelligent yellow eyes. Commander Elena Vasquez called an emergency council meeting. The prospect of being surrounded by potentially hostile alien predators made everyone nervous, especially since they were still 18 months away from the next supply ship from Earth. The settlement's defensive capabilities were minimal, more suited to keeping out curious wildlife than handling a coordinated attack by intelligent beings. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her normal routine, unaware that she had become the center of the greatest interspecies crisis in human history. She attended her lessons in the morning, helped her mother tend the hydroponic gardens in the afternoon, and played with the other children in the evening. The only unusual thing was her new habit of watching the perimeter fence through her bedroom window before sleep. Storm Who Walks had returned twice, always alone, always at twilight. He would sit just beyond the fence line, looking toward the settlement with what Sarah thought was hope. She wanted desperately to go to him again, but the gap in the fence had been repaired, and security had been increased. On the 4th day, everything changed. The morning alarm that woke the settlement was not the usual gentle chime that marked the start of the workday. It was the emergency klaxon, harsh and urgent, designed to alert colonists to immediate danger. Sarah bolted upright in her bed as her parents rushed to their emergency stations, her father grabbing his sidearm and her mother sealing the atmospheric vents according to protocol. Through the chaos of running feet and shouted orders, Sarah could hear Commander Vasquez's voice over the settlement's communication system. All personnel to emergency positions. We have approximately 200 Zephyrian wolves surrounding the settlement. This is not a drill. From her window, Sarah could see them. The entire horizon seemed to shimmer with silver-blue fur. They sat in perfect concentric circles around the human settlement, motionless as statues, their attention focused on something Sarah couldn't see from her position. What the adults couldn't know was that this gathering represented every wolf pack within 1,000 kilometers. They had traveled for days in response to Storm Who Walks' telepathic call, drawn by a story that defied everything they thought they knew about the strange hairless aliens who had come from the stars. The Zephyrians had been watching the humans since their arrival, trying to understand these creatures who moved in metal shells and seemed to fear everything around them. Human technology was impressive but crude. Their machines leaked electromagnetic signatures that any wolf could disrupt with a focused pulse. Their defensive measures were laughable to beings who could communicate instantly across vast distances and coordinate with the precision of a hive mind. But they had also noticed that humans seemed incapable of the telepathic communication that the wolves took for granted. They appeared to be isolated individuals, cut off from their pack mind, forced to rely on primitive verbal communication and physical gestures. The wolves had assumed this made humans inferior, perhaps even pitiable. Storm Who Walks' story changed everything. A human child had approached him not with fear or aggression, but with compassion. She had recognized his pain and acted to alleviate it, asking nothing in return. More remarkably, she had done this despite her obvious physical vulnerability and lack of pack support. The gathering was not a threat display. It was a council of war, but not the kind the humans feared. Elder Moonrunner, whose silver fur was touched with white and whose telepathic voice commanded respect across the entire planet, stood slowly from her position at the center of the gathering. At nearly 5 feet tall, she was among the largest of her species, and her presence commanded absolute attention from every wolf present. Her mental voice reached every mind in the assembly simultaneously. The small human showed honor to our youngest. She acted without thought of gain or protection from her pack. This is not the behavior of a weak or inferior species. This is courage beyond our understanding. A younger wolf, his fur bearing the scars of territorial disputes, projected skepticism. One act of kindness does not erase the threat they represent. Their technology pollutes our world. Their presence disturbs the natural order. Does it? Moonrunner's response carried the weight of centuries of wisdom. Or does it offer something we have never considered? They live as individuals yet somehow maintain pack loyalty. They show compassion to other species without the bond of shared consciousness. What if their weakness is actually a different kind of strength? The debate that followed occurred in seconds. Dozens of telepathic voices weaving together in a complex discussion that would have taken humans hours to conduct verbally. Arguments, counter-arguments, philosophical considerations, and practical concerns all flowed together in the peculiar harmony of Zephyrian group consciousness. The conclusion was unanimous, though it would have seemed impossible to any human observer. The wolves had decided to make contact, but not with the armed adults who cowered behind their technological barriers. Not with the leaders who saw them as threats to be managed or obstacles to be overcome. They would speak with the small one who had shown kindness without fear, who had acted with honor despite having no pack to protect her. As the sun reached its zenith, the entire gathering of wolves turned their attention to the settlement's main building. Their combined telepathic voice, focused and amplified by their shared will, reached out beyond their own species for the first time in their evolutionary history. Inside the settlement's command center, every piece of electronic equipment suddenly went silent, not broken or damaged, simply quiet, as if the wolves had politely asked the machines to stop making noise for a moment. And in that silence, a 7-year-old girl named Sarah heard a voice in her mind that sounded like wind through crystal formations, speaking words she understood despite having never heard them before. "Little one who shows kindness, will you come speak with us? We have much to learn from each other." Sarah's scream of excitement echoed through the settlement's corridors, cutting through the tense silence that had fallen when all their equipment mysteriously shut down. Her parents found her jumping up and down in their small living quarters, her face glowing with joy and wonder. "They talked to me. They actually talked to me," she exclaimed, grabbing her mother's hands and spinning around. "The wolves want to meet me. They said we have things to learn from each other." Dr. Elizabeth Chen, Sarah's mother and the settlement's chief botanist, felt her heart skip. Like every parent on Kepler 442b, she lived with the constant fear that something might happen to her child in this alien environment. The idea that the wolves had somehow communicated directly with Sarah was both fascinating and terrifying. "Sweetheart, slow down," she said, kneeling to Sarah's eye level. "What exactly did you hear?" Sarah's explanation tumbled out in a rush, the voice in her mind that sounded like music, the feeling of warmth and friendliness, the invitation to come outside and talk. She told them about helping the hurt wolf 3 days ago. Watching her parents' expressions change from confusion to amazement to something approaching panic. Commander Vasquez arrived within minutes. Having heard the report over the communication system, the settlement's leader was a veteran of 3 colonial missions, a woman who had faced equipment failures, hostile environments, and supply shortages with calm efficiency. But the idea of first contact being initiated through a 7-year-old girl was beyond anything in her training manuals. "Sarah," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened when you helped the wolf." As Sarah recounted her encounter with Storm Who Walks, the adults exchanged looks of growing realization. They had been approaching this situation entirely wrong. While they had been focused on threat assessment and defensive protocols, a child had accomplished something remarkable through simple compassion. Dr. Webb, monitoring the situation from the command center, reported that the wolves remained in their positions around the settlement but showed no signs of aggression. If anything, they seemed to be waiting patiently, their attention focused on the main building where Sarah was being questioned. "They're not going to hurt me," Sarah said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. Storm, who walks, was scared and hurt just like any animal would be. "They're not bad, they just didn't understand us before." The debate that followed was heated but brief. Half the council wanted to evacuate Sarah to the most secure location in the settlement. The other half argued that this was an unprecedented opportunity for peaceful first contact. Commander Vasquez found herself caught between her duty to protect the colonists and her recognition that this moment might determine the entire future of human presence on this world. Sarah settled the debate herself. "I'm going to talk to them," she announced with the stubborn determination that her parents knew all too well. "They asked me nicely, and it would be rude to ignore them." The compromise reached was typically human in its complexity. Sarah would be allowed to approach the fence accompanied by her parents and Commander Vasquez. Dr. Webb would monitor from a distance with full recording equipment. The settlement's defensive systems would remain active but not targeted. And if anything went wrong, Sarah would be pulled back immediately. What none of the humans realized was that their every word and decision was being transmitted telepathically across the wolf gathering. The Zephyrians found human communication fascinatingly inefficient, so much time spent explaining things that could be shared instantly, but they appreciated the obvious love and concern the adults showed for their young. Moonrunners. Approval rippled through the wolf consciousness. See how they protect their children? Even in fear, they consider her wishes. This is not the behavior of a species that seeks domination. As the small human delegation approached the fence, the massive gathering of wolves remained motionless. Sarah walked between her parents, her small hand clasped tightly in her mother's, but her eyes bright with anticipation rather than fear. Storm, who walked, separated himself from the nearest circle of wolves and approached the fence. Up close, the adults could see the intelligence in his yellow eyes, the way he moved with purpose rather than instinct. When he sat just beyond the barrier, his attention focused entirely on Sarah. The message was clear. This was her conversation. The moment stretched, full of possibility and tension. Then Sarah did something that would be remembered in both species' histories. She pressed her small hand against the fence and smiled. "Hello," she said simply. "I'm glad your nose feels better." The response came not as words but as a warm feeling of gratitude that somehow reached every human present. Dr. Webb's equipment registered massive electromagnetic fluctuations, but instead of the disruptive pulses they had feared, these seemed calibrated to human neural frequencies, an attempt at communication that wouldn't overwhelm their minds. Storm, who walks, projected images directly into their consciousness. Sarah approaching him in pain, her gentle hands removing the thorn, the relief and gratitude he had felt. But woven through these memories were other images. The wolf pack's discussions, their curiosity about humans, their confusion about human behavior and technology. Sarah laughed with delight. "You're showing me pictures. That's amazing." She pressed closer to the fence, her fear completely forgotten. "Can you see what I'm thinking too?" The answer came as a gentle probe, careful and respectful. Sarah felt a presence touch her mind, warm and curious, asking permission rather than demanding entry. When she mentally said yes, the contact deepened. What Storm, who walks, found in Sarah's mind astonished him. Unlike Zephyrian consciousness, which flowed freely between pack members, human minds were isolated but incredibly complex. Sarah's thoughts were layered with imagination, memory, emotion, and something the wolves had no equivalent for: the ability to conceive of things that had never existed and might never exist. Through Sarah's memories, Storm, who walks, saw Earth, blue oceans, green forests, millions of humans living together, despite having no telepathic connection. He saw cities built by individual effort somehow coordinated into magnificent wholes. He saw art created by single minds that somehow spoke to millions of others. The revelation rippled through the wolf gathering like wildfire. Humans weren't telepathically handicapped. They were something entirely different. They had evolved cooperation and empathy without the benefit of shared consciousness. Every act of kindness, every moment of understanding between them, was a choice made freely rather than an instinct driven by pack mind. Moonrunner's voice carried wonder as it reached every wolf present. They choose to be good to each other. Without the bonds we take for granted, they still choose compassion. What does this make them? The answer came from Storm Who Walks as he continued his gentle contact with Sarah's mind. Something we never imagined possible. Something we should learn from rather than fear. Sarah, unaware of the philosophical revolution occurring around her, was focused on sharing her own images with Storm Who Walks. She showed him her favorite places on Earth, her cat whiskers, the excitement she felt about living on a new world, and through it all her simple certainty that different didn't mean dangerous, that understanding was always better than fear. When the contact finally ended, both species had been changed forever. The humans had proof that intelligence could take forms they had never imagined. The wolves had discovered that courage and kindness didn't require the support of pack consciousness. Sometimes they were more meaningful when they stood alone. The transformation began immediately, but not in the way anyone expected. As news of the successful contact spread through both communities, the reactions revealed fundamental differences in how the two species processed change. The human settlement erupted into chaos. Emergency councils were called, reports were drafted and redrafted, and lengthy debates ensued about protocols, procedures, and proper channels. Dr. Webb's recordings were analyzed frame by frame. Commander Vasquez found herself fielding constant questions from colonists who wanted to know everything, from whether the wolves were dangerous to whether this would affect their land grants. Meanwhile, the wolf gathering began to disperse as naturally as morning mist. Their telepathic network meant that every pack on the planet already knew exactly what had transpired. Decisions that would have taken humans weeks to reach through committees and votes were resolved in moments through shared consciousness. The consensus was unanimous. The humans were not a threat to be eliminated, but potential allies to be understood. Sarah found herself at the center of attention she neither wanted nor fully understood. Adults who had barely noticed her before now asked endless questions about what the wolf had shown her, how the telepathic contact had felt, what she thought it all meant. She answered as best she could, but most of her responses were variations of "he was nice" and "why are you making this so complicated?" 3 days after first contact, Storm Who Walks appeared at the fence again, but this time he wasn't alone. With him came an elderly wolf, whose silver fur was streaked with white, and whose presence seemed to command respect from the other wolves in the area. Moonrunner had come to meet the small human who had changed everything. The wolf elder's telepathic voice, when it reached the human settlement, carried weight and authority that made even Commander Vasquez stop talking mid-sentence. But the message itself was simple. She wanted to speak with Sarah, and she wanted to understand how humans made decisions as a group when they couldn't share thoughts directly. What followed was the strangest diplomatic meeting in human history. Sarah sat cross-legged in the grass just inside the fence while Moonrunner settled herself on the other side. Between them, separated by a simple barrier of metal and energy, two species began to truly communicate. Moonrunner's telepathic abilities were far more sophisticated than Storm Who Walks. Where the younger wolf had shared images and emotions, the elder could transmit complex concepts and abstract ideas. She showed Sarah the structure of Zephyrian society, packs linked by blood and telepathy, decisions reached through instant consensus, conflicts resolved by shared understanding of all perspectives. In return, Sarah did her best to explain human society. She told Moonrunner about families and friends, about how her parents talked things through when they disagreed, about how the settlement made rules that everyone had to follow even if they didn't all agree. She described democracy and voting, laws and justice, cooperation achieved through discussion rather than mental connection. The wolf elder was fascinated by the concept of individual privacy. The idea that humans could keep thoughts to themselves was alien to Zephyrian experience. Among the wolves, deception was impossible and misunderstanding was rare, but Sarah helped her see the benefits of mental independence, the ability to surprise others with kindness, the value of choosing to share rather than being compelled to do so. "Your people must be very brave," Moonrunner projected, "to trust each other without knowing what others truly think." Sarah considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "I think we have to be," she said finally. "But that's what makes it special when someone is nice to you." They didn't have to be. As their conversations continued over the following days, patterns emerged that would shape the future relationship between the species. The wolves were natural teachers, their telepathic abilities allowing them to share knowledge instantly and completely. But they had never encountered concepts like creativity, imagination, or the human capacity to envision things that didn't exist. Humans, by contrast, were builders and dreamers. Their isolation from each other's thoughts had forced them to develop elaborate systems of communication and cooperation. They created art to share emotions they couldn't transmit directly. They built technologies to accomplish things their bodies couldn't do alone. Sarah became the bridge between these worlds, translating not just words but entire ways of thinking. When Moonrunner couldn't understand how humans could function without knowing their leader's true intentions, Sarah explained about trust and reputation, and the idea that actions mattered more than thoughts. When Dr. Webb struggled to comprehend how the wolves made collective decisions without voting or debate, Sarah helped him see that shared consciousness made such mechanisms unnecessary. The breakthrough came when Sarah had an idea that would change both societies forever. She was watching her parents work in the hydroponic gardens, noting how they had to constantly communicate about water levels, nutrient mixtures, and plant health through spoken words and written notes. Meanwhile, Storm, who walked, sat nearby, effortlessly monitoring the emotional state of every plant in the area through his species' natural bioelectric sensitivity. "What if you could help each other?" Sarah asked, looking between the struggling human farmers and the wolf who could sense plant distress instantly. "Storm, who walks, knows when the plants are unhappy, and my parents know how to fix what's wrong." The suggestion seemed obvious to a 7-year-old, but it was revolutionary to both species. The wolves had never considered that their natural abilities might be useful to others. The humans had never imagined that cooperation with an alien species could solve practical problems they faced every day. The first joint project began the next morning. Dr. Chen worked alongside Storm, who walks in the gardens, learning to recognize the subtle signs that indicated plant stress, while the young wolf guided her to problem areas his senses detected. The language barrier was solved through simple gestures and Sarah's translations, but the results were immediate. Diseased plants identified before symptoms appeared, optimal growing conditions maintained through bioelectric feedback. Word of the successful collaboration spread quickly through both communities. Other wolves began approaching the settlement fence, not with aggression or territorial displays, but with curiosity about these strange beings who built rather than adapted, who planned rather than simply responded to immediate needs. Moonrunner watched these developments with approval. Her long-range telepathic communications with wolf packs across the planet painted a picture of growing interest in human activities. The aliens were no longer seen as invaders or threats, but as puzzle pieces that might complete pictures the wolves had never known were incomplete. But the most significant change was in Sarah herself. The constant telepathic contact was affecting her in ways no one yet understood. She was beginning to sense emotions from the wolves even when they weren't actively communicating. Her parents noticed she seemed to know when they were worried or upset before they expressed it verbally. Dr. Webb, monitoring these developments, began to suspect that the interaction between human and Zephyrian consciousness might be creating something entirely new, a hybrid form of awareness that combined the best of both species' mental capabilities. What none of them realized was that Sarah's evolving abilities would soon be put to the ultimate test when a crisis emerged that would require both human ingenuity and Zephyrian wisdom to solve. The crisis began with what seemed like a simple equipment failure. The settlement's main atmospheric processor, responsible for maintaining breathable air in the enclosed farming domes, developed an intermittent fault that the human engineers couldn't diagnose. The system would run perfectly for hours, then suddenly shut down for no apparent reason. Commander Vasquez wasn't overly concerned at first. They had backup systems and portable scrubbers that could maintain life support while repairs were made. But when the backup units began exhibiting the same mysterious behavior, failing and restarting in seemingly random patterns, the situation became urgent. Dr. Webb was the first to notice the correlation. The equipment failures coincided with periods of high Zephyrian activity in the area. When large numbers of wolves gathered near the settlement, the technology malfunctioned. When they dispersed, it worked normally. "It's their bioelectric fields," he explained to the emergency council. "We knew they could disable our equipment deliberately, but we didn't consider that their mere presence might interfere with sensitive electronics." The more wolves in the area, the stronger the interference. The solution seemed obvious to most of the colonists. Ask the wolves to stay away until the equipment could be repaired. But Sarah, who had been quietly listening to the adult discussions, spoke up with a question that changed everything. "Did you ask them why they keep coming here?" she said. "Maybe they're trying to tell us something important." Sarah's suggestion led to an immediate conversation with Moonrunner through the fence. The wolf elder's response was deeply troubling. The Zephyrians weren't gathering near the settlement by choice. They were being driven there by something that was disturbing the natural balance of their territory through a series of telepathic images shared with Sarah and translated for the adults. Moonrunner painted a picture of ecological disaster spreading across the continent. The human farming operations, while successful in their designated areas, were affecting the planet's bioelectric network in ways no one had anticipated. The Zephyrian wolves, it turned out, were not just intelligent predators but integral components of their world's natural systems. Their bioelectric abilities served as a kind of planetary nervous system, maintaining balance between different ecosystems and regulating the complex energy flows that kept the planet stable. The human settlement, with its electromagnetic signatures and artificial systems, was disrupting this network. The wolves were gathering near the colony not because they wanted to, but because their biological instincts were driving them to try to restore the damaged balance. The revelation put both species in an impossible position. The humans needed their technology to survive on this alien world. The wolves needed their territorial ranges to maintain the planetary ecosystem. Without a solution, the human colony would fail, and the planet's ecological balance would collapse. Sarah found herself once again at the center of the crisis, serving as translator between two species facing potential mutual destruction. The weight of responsibility was enormous for a 7-year-old, but she approached it with the same directness she brought to all problems. "Why don't we just fix it together?" she asked during one particularly tense council meeting. "The wolves know what's wrong with the planet and we know how to build things. Maybe we can build something that helps instead of hurts." The idea seemed naive to most adults, but Dr. Chen took her daughter's suggestions seriously. Working with Dr. Webb and several other scientists, she began developing a theoretical framework for what Sarah had proposed, technology that worked with the planet's natural systems rather than against them. The breakthrough came when Storm Who Walks volunteered to participate directly in the research. The young wolf spent hours in the laboratory, demonstrating how his bioelectric field worked and allowing the scientists to measure and analyze the energy patterns his species used to communicate with their environment. What they discovered revolutionized their understanding of both technology and biology. The Zephyrian wolves didn't simply generate electrical fields. They created complex modulated signals that carried information and instructions throughout the planet's ecosystem. It was biological technology, evolved over millions of years to maintain planetary health. Dr. Webb realized that human electronic systems could be modified to work in harmony with these natural networks. Instead of jamming the planet's bioelectric communications, human technology could contribute to them, adding artificial intelligence and processing power to the natural system. The first prototype was built around the atmospheric processor that had started the crisis. Using Storm Who Walks as a living interface, the engineers created a hybrid system that combined human manufacturing precision with Zephyrian bioelectric control. The result was technology that not only worked on Kepler 442b but actually improved the local environment's stability. The success of the hybrid processor led to rapid development of other bioelectric technologies, farming equipment that could communicate directly with crops through the planet's natural networks, construction tools that used bioelectric feedback to ensure buildings integrated seamlessly with their surroundings, communication systems that worked through the same channels the wolves used, allowing humans to coordinate across vast distances without electromagnetic interference. But the most remarkable development was in Sarah herself. Her prolonged exposure to Zephyrian telepathy and her role as translator between the species was causing permanent changes in her neural structure. Dr. Webb's scans showed new connections forming in her brain, pathways that seemed designed to process the kind of information the wolves shared naturally. Sarah was becoming something new, not quite human, not quite Zephyrian, but a bridge between both species. She could sense the bioelectric patterns that the wolves used to monitor their environment. She could feel the health of the ecosystem around the settlement. Most remarkably, she could communicate telepathically with individual wolves while retaining her human perspective and creativity. Moonrunner recognized the significance of Sarah's transformation before the humans did. "She is becoming what both our species need," the elder wolf projected during one of their conversations. "A mind that can think like yours but feel like ours." The implications were staggering. If Sarah's abilities could be understood and perhaps replicated, it would mean the possibility of true partnership between humans and Zephyrians. Not just cooperation, but a genuine merging of capabilities that would benefit both species. However, Sarah's parents faced an agonizing decision. The changes in their daughter were irreversible, and no one knew what the long-term effects might be. She was no longer entirely human, but she seemed healthy and happy. More importantly, she insisted that she wanted to continue developing her new abilities. "I can help both sides understand each other," she explained to her worried parents. "Isn't that worth it?" The question would define not just Sarah's future, but the future relationship between humanity and the Zephyrian wolves. As news of the successful bioelectric technology spread, both species began to envision possibilities that neither could achieve alone. But with change came new challenges, and Sarah's unique position between two worlds would soon be tested in ways no one could anticipate. The crisis that would define Sarah's role in the growing partnership came from an unexpected source: other humans. Word of the successful collaboration on Kepler 442b had reached Earth through routine communications, and the response was not what anyone had hoped for. Administrator Harrison Blackwood arrived on the next supply ship, his credentials identifying him as a representative of the Colonial Development Authority with full oversight powers. His mission was clear: assess the situation on Kepler 442b and determine whether the unauthorized contact with alien species represented a security risk to human expansion. Blackwood was everything Commander Vasquez was not: a career bureaucrat who saw the universe in terms of regulations, protocols, and potential threats to human interests. He viewed the partnership with the Zephyrians as a dangerous precedent that could complicate humanity's expansion into other star systems. "We came here to establish a human colony," he announced during his first meeting with the settlement leadership, "not to play science fiction games with alien animals." Sarah, now 8 years old and serving as the primary interpreter between the species, listened to Blackwood's briefings with growing alarm. Through her enhanced connection to the Zephyrian network, she could feel the wolves' confusion and hurt as they sensed the hostility in the new humans' thoughts. Blackwood's first order was the cessation of all cooperative projects with the wolves. The bioelectric technology that had solved the atmospheric processing crisis was to be replaced with conventional human systems. The wolves were to be excluded from the settlement area, and all communication with them was to cease immediately. "We have procedures for first contact situations," Blackwood explained. "This entire operation has been conducted outside proper channels. Until Earth can send appropriate xenological experts and diplomatic personnel, all alien contact is suspended." The order created an immediate crisis. The hybrid systems developed with Zephyrian assistance couldn't simply be replaced overnight. The atmospheric processors, farming equipment, and communication networks had been so thoroughly integrated with the planet's bioelectric system that removing the wolf component would cause cascading failures throughout the settlement. Moreover, the wolves themselves were now dependent on the partnership. Their collaboration with humans had begun to restore the planetary ecosystem, reversing damage that had been accumulating for decades. Cutting off the relationship would not only harm the wolves but threaten the entire continental ecosystem. Sarah found herself caught between two incompatible worldviews. The humans from Earth saw the universe as a collection of resources to be claimed and controlled. The Zephyrians saw it as an interconnected web of relationships that required balance and cooperation. Both perspectives had value, but Blackwood's approach threatened to destroy everything that had been built. The confrontation came to a head when Blackwood ordered the activation of a new defensive perimeter designed to keep the wolves away from the settlement. The electromagnetic barriers generated fields that were painful to Zephyrian bioelectric senses, effectively creating a zone of exclusion around the human colony. The wolves' response was immediate and devastating. Without their regulatory presence, the bioelectric networks that maintained local ecosystem stability began to collapse, plants withered, water sources became contaminated, and the carefully balanced atmospheric composition began to shift toward toxicity. Worse, the defensive barriers were causing active harm to any wolf that came too close. Storm Who Walks, attempting to reach Sarah despite the pain, collapsed near the fence line, his bioelectric system disrupted by the artificial fields. Sarah's reaction was swift and decisive. Using abilities that had been developing since her first contact with the wolves, she reached out telepathically to shut down the defensive grid. Her hybrid consciousness, combining human technological understanding with Zephyrian bioelectric control, allowed her to disable the barriers from within the settlement's own systems. The action saved Storm Who Walks but put Sarah in direct conflict with Blackwood's authority. The administrator was furious that a child had countermanded his orders and demanded that Sarah be confined to prevent further interference. But Sarah was no longer simply a human child. Her consciousness was now part of the planetary network that the Zephyrians maintained. Confining her would be like trying to imprison the planet's nervous system. Through her connection to the wolves, she could monitor and influence systems throughout the continent. Moonrunner's response to the crisis was measured but firm. The elder wolf's telepathic voice reached every member of both species in the area. The small one who shows kindness has become something new, something that belongs to both our worlds. To harm her is to harm the future we are building together. The standoff that followed was unlike anything in human colonial history. Blackwood had the authority to enforce human regulations, but Sarah had the power to maintain or destroy the systems that kept the colony alive. The wolves had the numbers to overwhelm the settlement's defenses, but they chose instead to demonstrate their displeasure by withdrawing their support for the technological partnerships. Within hours, every system in the settlement began to fail, not through sabotage but through the absence of the Zephyrian bioelectric regulation that had become integral to their function. Atmospheric processors struggled to maintain air quality. Farming systems couldn't properly monitor plant health. Communication networks suffered constant interference. Commander Vasquez found herself mediating between an 8-year-old girl who commanded planetary-level systems and an Earth official who represented the authority of human space. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on anyone, but the stakes were too high for humor. The resolution came from an unexpected source: the settlement's children. Sarah's friends and classmates, who had been watching the adult conflicts with growing frustration, decided to take action themselves. Led by Marcus Chen, Sarah's 9-year-old neighbor, they organized what they called a friendship protest. 15 human children gathered at the settlement's main gate, holding signs they had made themselves with messages like, "Wolves are our friends," and "Don't hurt Storm Who Walks." They demanded to speak with Administrator Blackwood about why he was trying to stop them from learning about their new world. The sight of children advocating for interspecies cooperation had an impact that no adult argument could match. These were the colony's future. Young humans who had grown up seeing the wolves as neighbors rather than threats. Their innocent questions about why difference was scary and whether cooperation was really so dangerous cut through Blackwood's bureaucratic certainties. Dr. Webb, seizing the moment, presented Blackwood with comprehensive data on the partnership's benefits. The bioelectric technology had improved agricultural yields by 300%. Ecosystem restoration was proceeding at rates that would take centuries to achieve through human methods alone. Most importantly, the collaboration was creating knowledge that could revolutionize human understanding of both technology and biology. "We're not just building a colony here," Dr. Webb argued. "We're pioneering a new form of civilization, one that works with alien environments instead of against them. This could be the foundation for humanity's entire future in space." Sarah, watching the debate unfold, made a decision that would echo through history. Using her connection to both the settlement systems and the planetary network, she created a demonstration that no one could ignore. Every screen in the settlement suddenly displayed the same image: a real-time map of the continent showing the health of every ecosystem, the status of every bioelectric network, and the location of every living creature larger than a human hand. It was a view of the planet that only the combined efforts of human technology and Zephyrian consciousness could provide. a god's eye view of an entire world. "This is what we can do together," Sarah said, her voice somehow reaching everyone in the settlement despite her being nowhere near the communication system. "Isn't it worth trying to understand each other?" 5 years after Sarah pulled a thorn from Storm Who Walks' nose, the settlement on Kepler 442b had become something unprecedented in human history, a truly integrated interspecies colony. Administrator Blackwood's initial resistance had eventually given way to amazement as he witnessed what cooperation could accomplish, and his reports to Earth painted a picture of possibilities that changed humanity's entire approach to space colonization. Sarah, now 13, had grown into her role as humanity's first interspecies ambassador. Her unique neural adaptations allowed her to process both human thoughts and Zephyrian bioelectric communications, making her an invaluable bridge between two very different forms of consciousness. But she was no longer alone in her abilities. The discovery that prolonged contact with Zephyrian telepathy could trigger similar neural changes in other humans had led to the establishment of the integration program. Carefully monitored volunteers, mostly children and young adults whose brains were still plastic enough to adapt, underwent gradual exposure to wolf consciousness under Sarah's guidance. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. The new integrants didn't lose their humanity. Instead, they gained additional capabilities that enhanced their human traits. Enhanced empathy allowed them to resolve conflicts that would have escalated in traditional human societies. Bioelectric sensitivity gave them an intuitive understanding of ecological relationships, most remarkably their combination of individual creativity with networked consciousness led to innovations neither species could have achieved alone. Storm Who Walks had become the primary Zephyrian liaison to the human settlement. Now fully grown and bearing the status marks of a pack leader, he served as translator and advocate for his people in their growing relationship with humanity. His experience with Sarah had made him uniquely qualified to understand human psychology, and his natural telepathic abilities allowed him to communicate human concepts to wolves across the planet. The technological advances born from the partnership had revolutionized both societies. Human engineering combined with Zephyrian bioelectric control had produced living buildings that grew rather than being constructed, transportation systems that moved through the planet's energy networks, and computers that thought as much as they calculated. The wolves, meanwhile, had embraced human concepts of individual expression and creativity. Pack structures became more flexible as wolves began pursuing personal interests alongside their traditional roles. Art previously unknown in Zephyrian culture flourished as individual wolves learned to create rather than simply maintain. Moonrunner, despite her advanced age, had become the philosophical heart of the integration movement. Her teachings about balance and cooperation influenced not just the local partnership, but human thinking across the galaxy. Her telepathic dialogues with Sarah, recorded and transmitted to Earth, were studied in universities and government centers throughout human space. The greatest triumph came when the first mixed crews departed Kepler 442b for other worlds, ships carrying both humans and Zephyrians, guided by integrated navigators who could feel the bioelectric signatures of distant planets, began establishing settlements that worked with alien ecosystems from the very beginning. Each new world brought fresh challenges and opportunities. On the desert planet of Zirion, human water reclamation technology combined with Zephyrian desert navigation abilities created oases that supported both species. The ice world of Hadron became a center for atmospheric research as wolf. Bioelectric sensitivity helped humans understand the complex chemistry of frozen atmospheres. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. Humanity's encounter with the Zephyrians had shattered the assumption that intelligence necessarily led to competition and conflict. The wolves' proof that cooperation could exist without loss of individual identity gave humans a new model for interspecies relationships. Sarah often reflected on how a simple act of kindness had sparked such profound changes. She still remembered the moment clearly: a hurt animal, a thorns to be removed, a choice to help rather than flee. Such a small thing to change the course of two civilizations. Now, as she prepared for her role as Earth's first ambassador to non-human intelligence, Sarah carried with her the lesson that had started everything. Compassion was not weakness, but the foundation of true strength. In a universe full of different forms of consciousness, The ability to recognize pain and respond with kindness was perhaps the most important survival trait any species could possess. The colony that had begun with fearful humans hiding behind barriers had become a thriving metropolis where children of both species played together in gardens tended by hybrid bioelectric systems. Wolf pups learned mathematics from human teachers, while human children discovered their planet's intricate ecosystem through Zephyrian consciousness networks. Storm, who walks, often brought his own offspring to visit Sarah, teaching them the story of how their friendship had begun. The young wolves would listen with the intense attention their species brought to important teachings, then ask Sarah to tell them about Earth and the strange humans who had learned to fly between stars despite having no telepathic abilities. How did your people learn to trust each other enough to build spaceships together? One young wolf had asked recently. Sarah's answer captured the essence of humanity's greatest strength. We learned that being different doesn't mean being enemies. Sometimes the best things happen when you take a chance on kindness. The partnership between humans and Zephyrians had proven that the universe was wide enough for many forms of intelligence, and that differences in thinking could be sources of strength rather than conflict. As both species looked toward the stars and the countless worlds waiting to be discovered, they did so with the confidence that they would face whatever challenges arose together. And in the archives of both civilizations, the story was carefully preserved of how it all began, with a little human girl who saw an animal in pain and chose to help, pulling a thorn from an alien wolf's nose and in doing so, changing the future of two worlds. The lesson would be taught to the children of both species for generations to come, that the smallest acts of compassion could have the greatest consequences, and that the choice to show kindness to those who were different was the first step toward building a better universe for everyone.